The holiday season is the perfect time for math and math crafts. So in this video, we're going to make 3 beautiful math crafts that you can use as decorations and chat about the cool math behind them. The first cool idea I want to show you is the Koch Snowflake, which is actually a fractal made up of infinitely many steps. But it starts simply with an equilateral triangle. I then look down the middle third of each edge and replace it with the other 2 sides of an equilateral triangle with 1/3 the original side length. And then I keep going. I look down each edge again and I take the middle third and replace it with the other 2 edges of an equilateral triangle, now with 1/9 the original side length. And so on. Here I've plotted the first 11 iterations in the development of this fractal, and as I zoom in and in and in, the same basic pattern repeats. And if I continued this process forever, I could zoom in forever and keep getting the same shape. It's a fractal. Cool, right? There are all sorts of variants of this fractal, like I can flip a negative in the code to make the triangles point inwards, and then we get the Koch anti-snowflake, which I almost think is cooler, and you can even use these snowflakes to tile the plane. I'll share some of the cool mathematical properties of the Koch snowflake in a minute, but we can actually make a real-world decoration out of the Koch snowflake by starting with 2 big triangles that we glue together to be a star. I then can make 6 triangles whose base is 1/3 of the size and place those 6 triangles so that they stick out on both sides of each point of the red star. And finally, I can use 5 small yellow triangles whose base is again 1/3 of the base of the blue triangles. For each of those blue triangles, this is going to give 30 yellow ones overall. And if I flip it over, I get a pretty decoration that is the 3rd iteration of the algorithm that produces the Koch snowflake. Now I want to show you some really crazy mathematical properties of the Koch snowflake. Suppose this is one of the segments somewhere on the snowflake, and let me just say that it has length L. Then, if I'm going to the next iteration, I'm going to take this, divide it into 3 different segments, and each of these segments, now we're going to have length L divided by 3. Okay, so now let me put the triangle on. And when I take the triangle on, well, those sides, because it's equilateral triangles, also have length L over 3. And so what I've done is I've taken a length L and I've made it now a length 4/3 times L. There's 4 of these segments that are of length L divided by 3. That is, if I want to try and describe what the perimeter of the Koch snowflake is going to be, well, then it's just 4/3 times what the perimeter of the previous iteration was. Take the limit as n goes to infinity, and this is going to diverge. So the perimeter of our snowflake diverges to infinity. But what about the area? So same sort of thing. I've added a new triangle, and I want to say, well, what's the area of this new triangle that I've added? Now, this line segment was part of some previous triangle somewhere else on the snowflake. And because it had originally a base of L, but now the new one is a length L divided by 3, then going from the base to the area, the 1/3 gets squared and becomes 1/9 the size of the original triangle. So every time you add a new triangle in your new iteration of constructing this crazy snowflake, what you're really doing is adding triangles of area 1/9 the previous step. Okay, but how many are there going to be? Well, let's go back actually to the very original step where you just start with the triangle itself. That is, it's got all 3 sides. Maybe I'll say its initial area is some amount A0. Then I'm going to add, well, 3 triangles onto it, and here, each of those triangles is 1/9 of the original area. So the original area is A0, then I'm going to have A0 divided by 9 for each of these triangles. Going from the first to the second step was quite special because the very first step just begins with a triangle that's sort of closed. But something different happens for all subsequent steps. That is, let me just imagine I have a segment somewhere in my snowflake that looks like this. There's 4 segments, and so if I go to the next iteration, I get 4 different added triangles, each of those 1/9 the area of the previous step. So really what I'm saying is that the area added in the 9th step is 4/9 the area from the previous step. The 1/9 because all of my triangles are 1/9 as large. And then the 4 is because for whatever triangle I added in the previous step, I'm now adding 4 new triangles in the next step. Okay, so let's put all this together to try to figure out what the area is. Okay, it's a big, long, messy expression. So what's going on? Out the front is the a naught. This is the area of your original triangle, just some fixed number. Maybe it's just 1. Then I multiply by 1 to say, well, I have that first triangle, but then the next thing I'm going to be doing was adding 3 triangles of length 1/9, and that was why I have this 1/3 stuck up the front. Everything else in this infinite sum says for every iteration after that, k, 0 all the way up to n-1, I'm going to be adding 4/9 the area of the previous step every single time. Now we can use the power of calculus. This is a geometric series, so if I want to take the limit as n goes to infinity, I know how to replace the sum of r to the power of k. It's 1/1 minus r, so I can plug that in. This is just some number, and what do I get? I get a naught times 8/5. The area is finite. It's just 8/5 the original area. So what we've gotten is a finite interior area, nevertheless an infinite perimeter. Fractals are just so cool. Next up, let's talk about the symmetries of snowflakes. I'll start simple with a square, folding it in half into a triangle 3 times, and then I'm going to cut some random shapes, and when I unfold it, I get a pretty snowflake. What I'd really like to do is think about the symmetries of this object that I've created. One of the first things I notice is that if I rotate it by 90 degrees, 180 degrees, 270 degrees, or 360 degrees, it looks exactly the same every way that I do that. In addition, if I draw these 4 lines, I also have 4 different axes where I can reflect over. For example, I can reflect over this diagonal line and I get precisely the same shape, or I can flip it over the y-axis and I get precisely the same shape. And so this snowflake that began as a square actually has 8 different types of symmetries. The 4 different rotations by 90 degrees, and these 4 different axes of reflection, 8 in total. Now, real-world snowflakes like this one usually actually have 6 major points, and so let's instead fold our square, cut it in a way that makes a hexagon, and then I'll cut away from that hexagon whatever pattern you like, where we have a really pretty paper snowflake built out of a hexagon. And when I unfold it, I see that there are 6 different points. They're all roughly symmetric up to my ability to fold and cut nicely. Taking 360 degrees and dividing it by 6, that gives me 60 degrees, and if I do a 60-degree rotation, I end up exactly where I started. 6 different axes I could reflect around. So for example, if I rotate over this line here, I'm going to get a precisely symmetrical object. The group of symmetries here is now called D6, the dihedral group with 6 rotations and 6 reflections. Let's go back to the square, and I've made this not symmetrical, as in if I rotate by 90 degrees or pi/2, well, it looks different. The subscribe is going this way. But this is helpful for us to illustrate various properties of the symmetries of squares in general. For example, if I rotate 90 degrees, 90 degrees, 90 degrees, and then 90 degrees again, I get to 360 degrees, I'm back where I started, and it reads completely properly. Similarly, if I reflect around the axis and then reflect around the axis again, I get back to where I started. So 2 reflections along the same axis lead to the same result. But then I can have some slightly funkier things. For example, suppose I rotate by 90 degrees, and then I was to flip over the x-axis, leaving this location. However, what if I went in the other order? Suppose I was to reflect over the x-axis and then rotate by 90 degrees. Well, this is not what I had just seen before. This has got the exclamation point up at the top. But if I then rotate a second time and a third time, I'm in precisely the scenario that I was just in. Which is to say that if I rotate and then flip, I've gotten the same result as if I flip and then rotate 3 times. So what exactly is going on here? Let me be a bit more specific about what's going on with this dihedral group. Well, what I'm going to do is define E to be the thing that just does nothing, just leaves your object exactly where it is. I'm going to define A to be a rotation by pi/2. Specifically, I'll do a counterclockwise rotation. And then for B, I'm going to denote that reflecting over the x-axis. So my preferred way to write down the dihedral group is actually the following. I like to list it as 8 elements. E, A squared, A cubed, B, BA, BA squared, and BA cubed. what I'm basically doing is listing down all the ways that I can mash together doing some combination of the rotations. Like, for example, rotation by pi, I don't need to give it a new name. It's just a squared because you rotate by pi over 2 and then pi over 2 again and you've rotated by pi. So you then might say, well, hold on, you haven't written down every possible way I could combine an A and combine a B. There might be a whole bunch of other ones. But the big idea here is that all other combinations are actually already on this list. For example, let's take the point A. I've got a squared, a cubed. What about a to the fourth? Well, a to the fourth is just rotating 90, 90, 90, 90 is 360 degrees, or 2 pi radians. That's just getting right back to the thing that does nothing, which we called E. So a to the fourth is on this list, it's just not written that way, it's written as E. Or for a more complicated one, as we saw earlier, if you decide to rotate first and then reflect, this is the same thing as reflecting first and then rotating 3 times. AB is equal to BA cubed, another thing that's already on my list. It's worthwhile sitting down and trying to play with these combinations and convincing yourself that this list of 8 elements is all the possible ways. In math speak, what we say is we have a binary operation, which means if I take any 2 elements from the set and combine them, like do one, then do the other, then the result of that is something that is in the set. It is so-called closed under this binary operation. The final decoration I want to show you is how we can make an origami stellated dodecahedron, which are just lots of fun. I'm going to start with a little square piece that I fold in half and then fold each half in half again. I bend down the top right corner to the left side, rotate it and bend the other corner to the side. Then I'm going to fold the top triangle down to the midline, rotate and fold the other triangle down to the midline, give it a nice fold in the middle. This basic shape can be used to make all sorts of cool things, and this dodecahedron requires 30 of them. Now it's time to assemble. You can take the corner of one of the pieces and stick them into the folds of the other like this. The immediate goal is to make lots of little pyramids with 3 separate corners from 3 separate pieces, all sticking into the folds of each other. And we keep doing this with the basic goal that around one of the central holes there should be 5 mountain peaks. I usually screw this up and sometimes the patterns will have 4 peaks or 6 peaks, which give other interesting objects, but we are aiming for 5 in our dodecahedron. Anyway, after you get your first 5 peaks around one of these holes, you keep going like this and we'll eventually close it off, and the last couple are a bit finicky, but there we are, we finally have our beautiful dodecahedron. Now, if you really want to master mathematics and not just make pretty math decorations all day, then I would highly recommend the sponsor of today's video, which is Brilliant.org. Brilliant has thousands of lessons on mathematics, science, and computer science, but what I really wanted to show you today is this lesson in their Infinity course on another really cool fractal called the Hilbert curve. This so-called space-filling curve has the remarkable property that the one-dimensional curve is eventually going to be filling up an entire 2-dimensional space. Cool, right? But what I really like about Brilliant is just how interactive their lessons are, whether it's playing with the graphics, testing my knowledge, or checking out the explanations if I don't quite understand a question yet. Brilliant puts you in the driver's seat. As a math professor, I know that this kind of active learning approach is highly effective for both learning mathematics and becoming a better problem solver, and that's why I'm so proud to be sponsored by Brilliant. So go to brilliant.org/Trevor Bassett or click the link down in the description to sign up for free. Also, the first 200 people to click that link are going to get an extra 20% off their annual premium subscription. With that said, if you have any cool math crafts, I'd love to see them down in the comments below. Give the video a like, and we'll do some more math in the next video.